classmates. Today I'm here with one expert in everything related with water, and she is one of the most important elements of the Environment and Development Department of Zamorano. So she is the engineer Tenorio, and today we are going to talk about the use of black polyethylene balls to reduce water evaporation. So first, thank you, Engine.
Good afternoon. Thank you for asking me.
Well, first, thank you for giving your time, a little bit of your time. Well, we're going to start. What do you think about water evaporation around the world?
Well, water evaporation is a very important part of the hydrologic cycle. If it wasn't for the evaporation, we wouldn't have rainfall, which is the most important part of entrance of water to a system. So it's natural that evaporation will occur. The rate of evaporation varies among different countries or different regions, or even different times of the year. But in most scenarios where there's water, the major loss of water occurs due to evaporation. So in the end, for a system to contain a healthy amount of water to sustain agriculture and different activities, there has to be mechanisms to either store the water during the rain season and make it available during the dry season, or to make the most efficient use of the water that is within that system. When we do water balances, we study evaporation because, like I said, it's the major loss of water in the system. So you need to take that part into account when you need to investigate how much water you will have available for any watershed or any region or any country.
Okay, but what about climate change? So it has a big influence on water evaporation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it depends also with contamination.
Mm-hmm.
So if people contaminate more, it increases climate change also.
So there are many links between climate change and the hydrologic cycle. But yes, if the temperature around the globe is going to increase due to climate change, or it actually has been increasing due to climate change, that means there's more energy to evaporate the water. So in some regions where there's already projected that the temperature is going to rise for about 1 degree Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius, we already know that those regions are going to have higher evaporation rates. So it's anticipated that we will have higher losses of water due to evaporation. Pollution is another issue, of course, for many reasons. One, because if there's more pollution in the atmosphere, climate change will continue to occur. And if you see the pollution of the water itself, it's also an additional restraint. If the water that you have available is polluted, then it's water that is not useful for the things that you need, like irrigation and potable water.
Okay, well, next. In your opinion, do you think it is important to establish environmental laws all around the world, or just in the countries that are considered the most polluting?
Definitely we need regulations. Otherwise, there's no control on how people use the resources that are available. So if there is no regulation, the pollution will continue because no one will want to reduce the income generation. For instance, those who depend on energy, or those who depend on using gasoline or fossil fuels, they're not going to just want to reduce the profits of their businesses. But if there's a law that restricts the amount of emissions or pollution that they can emit, then they will be forced to come up with ideas to reduce the pollution. And it'll be something that they will have to do, not something that they could or could not do, depending on how they feel about the topic.
But it would be better if we start with that laws now, not after, when the problem is like really
bad. The problem is already really, really bad. It could get even worse. So yeah, we need to start. If it hasn't been done, in some areas there has been some regulations, but if it hasn't been done, we need to start doing it now.
Do you know any country that has strict laws about it? But
the European Union has
all the European.
Most of the countries, if not all, as a bloc, as a group, they do have regulations, and not just regulations, but they also have incentives, which is another way to promote change. You either penalize and say, okay, if you don't do this, you're going to have to pay a fee or you're going to have to go to jail. But there's another way to do it. If you do it, then you'll get a reduction in the taxes, or you'll get access to loans or access to other technologies. So they do also the regulation, but they also do incentives.
Do you think that that kind of regulations would be good to implement here in Central America?
Yes, in as long as they could be accomplished. If you establish a regulation, in order for it to be effective, you need to make sure that the inhabitants or the population will have the resources to complain with the regulation, because otherwise you're going to have a strict law that no one's going to be able to implement, and so there's no point in having the law, because people will not have the resources to invest in the technology to reduce the pollution, or will not have any other alternatives. For instance, cattle farming. You know that it produces greenhouse emission gases, but you can't just prohibit cattle farming, because then you will have a lot of farmers with no way to get money to sustain their families. So there's got to be a balance between the regulation and how the population could accomplish or could comply with that regulation.
So it would be implemented here.
It could be, as long as it's adjusted to the conditions of the country.
Yeah, it would take a lot of time when people get acquainted with that. I think it would be difficult.
It would be difficult, but there has to be regulations.
Yeah. Well, could you tell me your opinion about the use of black polyethylene balls to reduce water evaporation?
Okay, so this is a very new technology. It was implemented in California, and several dams in California, to reduce the evaporation. It's important to say that in this particular case, it was an extreme solution, because California has had a drought for many years in a row, and their activities, their production, their potable water sources have been threatened by the drought. So they came up with this idea to reduce the evaporation with the balls, and I think it's creative. It's a different approach. It's something that probably not many people would have thought about before, and it has its pros and cons. It is a good solution for an emergency situation like this, but it also has additional impacts, environmental impacts, because the production of the plastic needed a lot of energy, required a lot of fossil fuels to produce, and it produced a carbon footprint that has some impacts in terms of climate change. After when the balls need to be discarded, they will have to be recycled, and that will require energy, or some other alternatives would have to be put in place so that the balls themselves are not going to create other impacts. But for this, or for last year, I think it was a very good idea to put science into work and solve a problem that otherwise wouldn't have been solved. They saved thousands and thousands of cubic meters of water, and that water was saved to use for different purposes. So apparently it worked.
Okay. Well, I read that black polyethylene reduces the incidence of UV rays, and also reduce the proliferate of algae because the photosynthesis is blocked. So the plants that were there before, with the use of these black balls, will die, and they are going to decompose and contaminate water. So how could this water be cleaned?
Okay, so this Also, there hasn't been many studies about this because this is the first time that it's in place. I'm sure that there are scientists looking into water quality and see. I'm sure they are comparing dams with no balls to dams with the balls during the same period of time to see what the effects of this were on the biodiversity and also on the water quality. So it's not well understood yet. I'm sure next year or in a couple more years there will be studies published about how it affected the water quality. For now, I believe that the quantity was their main target, to preserve as much water as possible. Then after that, if the water is used for potable water, those dams have treatment plants. And so the water goes into a sequence of processes of coagulation, flocculation, that is the addition of chemicals to improve the water. The water is aerated as well to improve the odor and the taste of the water. And then the water is filtrated, and it has several treatments after that. I'm sure they anticipated that and put something in place to treat the water before it's served to the users.
So the algae are not a problem.
Probably not.
Okay. So for you, well, we have already talked about the advantage, a little bit of disadvantage using this method. So nowadays, is there another method to reduce water evaporation?
Other methods to reduce evaporation. Well, if you have the money, you could put tents on it to cover the block to block the entrance of sunlight. But if you have large reservoirs, it wouldn't be feasible. If you have a way for small amounts of water, for very small amounts of water, and depending on the use, of course, it's not going to be used for drinking or the other purposes. But you could add like a tiny little bit of oil on the top, and the oil reduces the evaporation of the water. But for reservoirs, nothing that I know of.
Okay. What about the polyethylene? It is the unique material which can be used to make the balls.
No, well, different kinds of polyethylene could be used with different densities. It could be anything that blocks the sunlight and that has the ability to float and not decompose. So, like I said, we could try with any plastic bowl, any cheap plastic bowl, and compare if it's as efficient as those polyethylene bowls to reduce the water evaporation. Because in the end, you want something that will cover the entire area, that is dark enough to absorb the radiation, and that also could be put in place easily. So with the balls, you just dump the balls and they will spread easily.
Do you know if these balls have something inside them?
No, I don't know. I don't know what they have. Probably not. You just need them to float.
Okay. Well, is here in Honduras any case as similar as in California? And what methods do you think that citizens and government could implement to mitigate or reduce this effect?
Yes, we have. One of the main areas. Well, the whole country is affected if you have a drought period, like in California. In Tegucigalpa is particularly important because you have a large population living in a place, and all that growing population needs water. Tegucigalpa has three major sources of water and two main reservoirs. If there's a drought, the consumption of water increases. There's no rainfall, and the temperature increases and increases the evaporation rate. So we've had several years where those dams have come to very low levels, which results in the service of water being very irregular, and some areas of the city end up only getting once a week or once every 2 weeks. So it's also extreme scenario where the water has to be regulated. They reduce the exit of water from the dams since they cannot add anymore, and that becomes a real problem for the city and for many inhabitants of the city. If you ask me if something needs to be done, well, many things need to be done. Adding another reservoir would be an alternative, so that way we can collect the water during the rainy season that we lack during the dry season. That implies a lot of investment, a lot of money that usually the government don't have. And also there need to be incentives or regulation to reduce the consumption of water in Tegucigalpa. Many industries or even citizens have large amount of water and they don't save it, they don't take care of it.
So the reservoirs get water just from rain.
From the rain that comes into the streams, and the streams go into the reservoirs.
Okay. So, finally, what advices could you give to students to improve the environmental spirit?
That's a good question. I think something very important to do while you're young and are students is to try to learn as much as possible about these topics, because once you go out to the professional world, then you'll have a broader perspective of what's expected of the professionals, and also are more open to solutions and are more able to come up with alternatives to solve environmental issues. So study more about environment, learn more, read more about what's going on, and then maybe become part of the solution.
Read more about our impact on the environment. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. I hope you got it this time.
Yes.